In a first for Taiwan, prosecutors charge a Chinese ship captain with intentionally cutting one of its undersea cables. Chaos in global markets. Neither Beijing nor Washington is backing down on escalating tariffs, throwing stock markets into turmoil again. Taiwan's premier looks for support from the legislature as the government hopes to use Trump's 90-day tariff pause to come up with a game plan. Plus,
我觉得我最想念的应该就是那种不期而遇的客人。
a chapter is closing. One beloved new Taipei bookstore is shutting its doors. Good evening. Welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Joyce Tseng. Prosecutors in Taiwan are charging a Chinese ship captain with severing an undersea cable off Taiwan's southwest coast. Reese Ayers is live with us in the newsroom with more details. Reese, this arrest sets a new precedent for Taiwan, doesn't it?
It does, Joyce. It's actually the first time that Taiwan has ever charged someone with cutting an undersea cable. Taiwan's pretty serious about protecting these cables. They're important infrastructure for transferring mass amounts of data and information. Taiwan's got several of these cable systems running from its main island to some of its outlying territories, including Jinmen and to Penghu. Now, this particular accident, or this particular incident happened back in February involving a boat called the Hongtai 58 and the undersea cable from Taiwan to Penghu, cable number 3. Now, authorities spotted that ship off Taiwan's southwest coast. It was loitering in the waters there for a few days. And then on February 25th, Taiwan's biggest telecom company, Zhonghua, reported that the cable actually had been severed. Now, the ship is suspected of dropping its anchor, hooking the cable, and then tugging on it until it broke. Now, Taiwan's Coast Guard then boarded that ship, which is actually registered in the African country of Togo, and then detaining all 8 crew members on that ship, who were all Chinese. Now, only the ship's captain has actually been charged. The other 7 crew members have been deported back to China due to a lack of evidence.
Right, so this is the first time a person is being charged over such a crime here, but it's not the first time for one of Taiwan's cables to be cut.
No, it's actually at least one of 2 incidences of cables being cut this year involving Chinese ships. And actually, just a few weeks ago, China announced that they had developed new technology, a remote device that can go into the world's deepest waters and cut the world's strongest cables. Remember, China actually claims Taiwan as part of its territory and recently has been ramping up efforts around the island to intimidate Taiwan, including large naval exercises and also simulated blockades. And so these cable cutting incidents are believed to be part of Beijing's ongoing gray zone warfare tactics, which is a way to intimidate and put pressure on Taiwan without actually attacking. But also, there's an upcoming project involving Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and the west coast of the United States that will link those 4 locations with an undersea cable. So right now, it's probably not just Taiwan who's concerned about China's ongoing deep-sea sabotage.
Thank you, Reese. That was Reese Ayers live from our newsroom. There's been more volatility in global markets as investors weigh the impact of Donald Trump's tariff policies. Wall Street dropped again after the White House imposed even higher duties for Chinese imports. Rosie Greninger reports.
American toy shop owner Joe Novak is bracing for an uncertain future, as the Trump administration clarified that tariffs against Chinese goods are higher than initially understood. Beijing will pay a 125% tariff. on top of the 20% imposed last year, subjecting imports to the US to a total levy of 145%. And American consumers are ultimately expected to pay the price.
So as you can tell by tariffs affecting China predominantly right now, as well as some Southeast Asia, a tariff of 20, 40, 50, they keep going up, 80, 100%, is going to definitely affect the cost of the toys.
Thanks.
After announcing sweeping global tariffs last week, US President Donald Trump has paused the policy for 90 days for all countries except China. That's after China retaliated, applying levies of 84% to goods imported from the US. But President Trump says he still wants to make a deal with Beijing.
I have great respect for President Xi. He's been, in a true sense, he's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. And I think that we'll end up working out something that's very good for both countries. I look forward to it.
China claims they are open to dialogue, but only if it's based on mutual respect. As the trade war between the world's two biggest economies continues to escalate, the impacts are being felt on the stock market. After rallying in their previous session, much of Wall Street's gains were wiped out overnight. The exchanges in Asia and Australia have also plunged. Financial experts say if the tariff policy remains, so will the uncertainty.
There is one bit of signal this market is sending to the president, and really to one man, the president himself. We do not like this tariff strategy. Every bit of news can be linked back to a tweet or a direct policy item that came out which was tariff related.
Trump has conceded there will be initial difficulties, but remains adamant Americans must stay focused on his end goal: boosting manufacturing in the US and in turn creating more jobs. The US president claims more than 70 countries are looking to negotiate a deal, now including the European Union, which has halted planned retaliatory measures.
We want to negotiate. We want to talk. We appreciate that you have brought this pause on so-called reciprocal tariffs, and we in turn are now pausing our proposed countermeasures.
Trump's aides say negotiations are going well, with over a dozen deals already being offered to the United States Trade Representative.
USTR has informed us that there are maybe 15 countries now that have made explicit offers that we're studying and considering and, deciding whether they're good enough to present to the president.
Despite being one of the US's main trading partners, China is not among the countries lining up to negotiate, saying they refuse to bow to pressure, blackmail and threats, leaving the trade war between these two economic powers escalating and likely to impact global growth. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
China has now raised its tariff on U.S. imports to 125%, the latest escalation in the trade war between the two countries. But Beijing says it will not respond to any further U.S. tariffs. Taiwan's premier is calling on the legislature to support the government's plan for alleviating Trump's tariffs of 32% on the country, which have been paused for 90 days. Tiffany Wong has more.
Taiwan's cabinet has promised more government support for its manufacturing and agricultural industries, two industries which are expected to be hit hard if the U.S. falls through on new tariffs. On Wednesday, Trump announced a 90-day pause to the so-called reciprocal tariffs except on China, putting a halt to tariffs of 32% on Taiwan, although a flat tariff of 10% is still in place. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te says the country will be in the first round of discussions with the U.S. as countries clamor to negotiate with the U.S. and get tariffs retracted. Lai has proposed a zero-tariff basis, suggesting Taiwan would buy more U.S. goods and invest more to even out the U.S.'s trade deficit. Taiwan's premier asked for support from the legislature for these discussions, but opposition legislators are concerned that Taiwan may be playing too nice with the U.S.
我们愿意付出什么代价？付出什么代价？是因为国际贸易嘛，有得有失嘛。策略方面，我大概不容易明讲了，是变明讲。但是我们可能付出，就是我们必须在关税对等的这个情况，不是对等关税哦，是双方面关税对等的情况底下，我们可能要做一些调试，而且我们在排除非关税障碍。
While Taiwan hopes to get on with talks with the U.S. as soon as possible, it will need to balance its relations with its closest unofficial ally and the interests of Taiwanese people to ease economic uncertainties abroad and at home. Chris Ma and Tiffany Wong in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
After a week of market fluctuations, let's get more on where the global order now stands on trade. Alec McDonald spoke to Jia Ian Chong from the National University of Singapore.
With the U.S. opening a trade war that has been underpinned by uncertain policy, how have geopolitical partnerships shifted in Asia?
What's actually really interesting is with the tariffs, the alliance and formerly the alliances and the other kinds of relationships have not changed. They've not technically changed. There's been no abrogation of treaties. There's been no amendment of treaties. But what has happened is that there's a lot more apprehension about U.S. commitment. There's a lot less clarity over the direction in which the U.S. is heading, especially in terms of cooperation. People might bring up the issue of Ukraine, but Ukraine is not a U.S. treaty ally.
In this instance, then what case can Taipei benefit from this new trade environment?
So what's interesting is because Taiwan had actually benefited from the last sort of shock to trade during the first Trump administration, where economic ties with the PRC, between the US and the PRC, were tightened. So there was this acceleration of a China plus one strategy. Many Taiwanese firms relocated back to Taiwan, or Taiwanese firms moved from the PRC elsewhere. And because Taiwan was seen as part of that safer supply chain, it gained. I guess that is something that Taiwan can still bank on, although the certainty of that approach certainly is called into question by the Trump administration's more perhaps cavalier attitude towards longstanding relationships. That having been said, Taiwan is a major producer of semiconductors. It is important for U.S. security interests. U.S. have not stepped away from them. In fact, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, during his visit, has said that the U.S. continues to be interested in deterrence in East Asia. So those are things that Taiwan can work on. Taiwan has shown itself to be a good partner in the past. It can potentially do that, continue to do that.
Next week, Xi Jinping will visit Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam, 3 nations which had very high U.S. tariffs applied on them before the pause. So what implications could this visit bring about?
I think these states were beneficiaries of the China plus one strategies, and hence their high surplus, and probably with the United States, hence the tariffs. At the same time, these 3 Southeast Asian states are ones that have been trying to cultivate closer relations with the PRC at any rate. So I suppose looking at the trade war with the United States, General Secretary Xi Jinping probably thinks that he can perhaps find inroads for cooperation with these 2 states. Now, things are also complicated, and probably Xi will have to work through them. One, because these 3 states, the way that their economies work is that they will sometimes produce components that get shipped to China for final assembly, or vice versa. But one of the major final markets is the United States. If the U.S. is closed off to the PRC, we could see a diversion of trade through these countries toward the U.S. And the question will be whether Washington wants to then shut off those channels as well. At the same time, these 3 countries, they being in close having close economic ties with the PRC means to say that they also take quite a lot of PRC exports. And there have been concerns about overcapacity in the past. This pressure is likely to increase as the U.S. market is essentially shut off to PRC goods, and that the diversion of trade to these countries from the PRC could put a lot of pressure on these economies, especially small and medium-sized enterprises.
That was Jia Ian Chong, a political scientist at the National University of Singapore. President Lai Ching-te says Taiwan will be one of the first countries to talk trade with the U.S.
我嘛要让大家知影，咱台湾现主时是美国政府第一批的谈判的名单内底，政府会做好准备。
Speaking to manufacturing industry representatives, President Lai said he's hopeful that Taiwan can strike a deal with the U.S. soon. Lai also called for unity, urging the nation to stand together as Taiwan braces for the impact of U.S. tariffs. U.S. President Donald Trump had announced 32% tariffs on most products from Taiwan, though he later suspended those for 90 days. Asian stock markets wavered on Friday despite a Thursday rebound following a pause on U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs for all countries except China. Taiwan's Taiex was still up on Friday, but other Asian stock indexes were down slightly over fears of a U.S.-China trade war. In Japan, the Nikkei was down nearly 3%. Meanwhile, the Shanghai and Hong Kong indexes were up slightly. The White House says U.S. tariffs on China stand at 145%, but China has not backed down from issuing its own reciprocal tariffs of 125%. A former county councilor from China who was retroactively removed from office is taking legal action against the Taiwan government.
我想只有进入正式的司法程序，我也希望司法可以秉持着一个法理跟一个程序的正义，来还给我们陆配一个参与公职选举的一个合法性、正当性。
The Interior Ministry revoked Shi Xueyan's office after she couldn't prove she had given up her Chinese citizenship. Taiwan requires public officials to renounce foreign citizenship before being sworn in. But Shi's lawyer argues that under Taiwan's constitution, Chinese citizens are not considered foreigners and that they use a separate law. The Mainland Affairs Council says Chinese citizens are not recognized as Taiwanese nationals.
那什么样的人有中华民国国籍呢？ 那根据入出国移民法，中华民国国民是具有中华民国国籍之居住台湾地区，你设有户籍，或是你在台湾地区没有户籍的国民，这个就是中华民国国民。所以大陆地区人民，他并不属于中华民国国民。
If the Interior Ministry's decision stands, Shi will have to pay back any salary and benefits that she received during her term. Taiwan Straits Exchange Foundation, a semi-official body handling relations with China, says they are receiving more questions than normal. That's after the government announced it will require thousands of Chinese spouses in Taiwan to prove they've given up their household registration in China.
其实对于这个大部分的这个陆配来说，他们接到这个通知，第一个最担心的一个问题就是说我该怎么处理这件事情。所以大部分的这个来询问的一个民众，大概第一个非常的焦虑，第二个不知道该如何处理。
The foundation says it's assigned additional staff to their service counter and added new telephone hotlines. Since 2004, Taiwan has required Chinese citizens applying for Taiwanese ID cards to first give up their household registration in China. But Taiwan's immigration agency says it has found no records for over 10,000 Chinese spouses. It is giving them a 3-month deadline to provide such proof. Coming up after the break, factory workers in Cambodia fear the hard-hitting consequences of Trump's tariff policies. Stay tuned.
For more stories from Taiwan, around the world, and Washington, D.C., please download the TaiwanPlus app and follow us on social media.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. A British trade minister and the country's defense chief are in Beijing this week. It marks the first visit in a decade by the head of the UK's military. The defense chief said on social media that he spoke with Chinese counterparts about security issues and the importance of military communications. An official source told The Guardian that the trade minister's visit was unrelated to Trump's 145% tariff on Chinese goods. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been seeking closer relations with Beijing since he took office in July, which has raised concern among some in the UK government. Experts say footage of Russian troops executing captured Ukrainian prisoners of war is the clearest evidence of war crimes since 2023.
They're lined up outside the building. They're briefly searched by several of the Russians. These Russians then wait for further 2 more Russian soldiers to join them, at which point they answer something on the radio, perhaps, wait for a moment, and then they begin spraying fire into these soldiers.
The footage comes from 2 drones, 1 Russian and 1 Ukrainian. It shows Ukrainian soldiers surrendering from a bombed-out house. Russian troops force them to lie down and then kill them at close range.
Since last August, we've documented a startling spike in the number of executions of captured Ukrainian service persons. We've documented the killings of 91 captured Ukrainian soldiers in 29 separate incidents.
Killing prisoners of war is a war crime under international humanitarian law. Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to visit Southeast Asian countries, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Malaysia next week. It comes as Cambodia faces the harshest U.S. tariffs outside of China. The levy's been delayed for now, but as Chris Gorin reports, the fear is very real for factory workers.
In Phnom Penh's busy streets, Nam Lung grabs sweet potatoes on her way to work at a factory for American clothing brand Levi's. It's one of 2 jobs she works to support herself and her sister, jobs she fears could vanish under new U.S. tariffs.
If there's no negotiations to remove these tariffs, it will be hard for investors to keep their factories here. If they shut it down, we'll lose our jobs, which will be a big problem for me.
Among Donald Trump's tariffs announced last week, Cambodia received the most punishing of all, a 49% tax on goods it exports to the U.S. The U.S. is Cambodia's largest export destination, accounting for 40% of its total exports. The tariff has been postponed for 90 days, but that's little comfort to workers like Nam Lung.
My sister here is sick. She can't work, so she lives with me. If I have no work, no income, then I die, and she dies too.
At the factory, she makes about $300 US a month, but she says it's not enough to support herself and her family. At night, she works a second job at a beauty salon. And as U.S. tariffs shake Southeast Asia, Chinese President Xi Jinping is stepping in, announcing today that he will make state visits to Cambodia, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Beijing's attention may seem like a lifeline to workers like Nam Lung, who just want to work.
I strongly appeal to our government to negotiate with rich countries like the US on ending the tariffs so that investors will stay in Cambodia, which will save our jobs.
For now, Nam Lung continues working, day and night, hoping that someone is listening. Alex Chen, Izzy Wells, and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
All good things come to an end. A special Southeast Asian bookstore in New Taipei is closing after a decade. But as Tiffany Wong reports, the community hopes its legacy will live on.
Closing a chapter on this beloved bookstore. Brilliant Time, a Southeast Asian-themed bookstore in New Taipei, is shutting down after 10 years. The space has been a hub for people from Southeast Asian countries living in Taiwan, looking for stories of their homelands. And now the owners say their mission is complete.
但这10年来，慢慢台湾各地的图书馆也开始有东南亚的书了。就政府用政府的 budget 来买书，然后给在台湾的外籍劳工、外籍配偶看。所以我觉得我们的阶段性任务基本上完成了。
The husband and wife team of Zhang Zheng and Yun Zhang Liao have run the store as a space for visitors to gather on the weekends and borrow books, listen to lectures, or just meet with friends.
我觉得我最想念的应该就是那种不期而遇的客人，就是其实有时候我们来店里也不知道会遇到谁，但就推门而入就会遇到一些很神奇的朋友。
Although the bookstore catered to Southeast Asian readers, they also had frequent local visitors, people wanting to learn more about Taiwan's growing multicultural society. There are around 800,000 migrant workers in Taiwan, nearly all from Southeast Asia, and about 500,000 so-called new immigrants, or foreign spouses of Taiwanese citizens, many of whom face barriers and prejudice in local society.
灿烂时光真的，我感觉这边真的会让来自不同地方的人，就是会 stick together， 然后这种 intertwine 的这种氛围是我在其他书店好像比较没有那么多。我会说就是还是会有一些，可是这种氛围是我一直觉得这边有一个魔力。就那一场的读书会，虽然只是短短2个小时，但我觉得那个 journey 是很丰富的。
The bookstore's rich history is painted on the walls, with postcards and signatures from visitors, and gifts from people whose lives were touched by the stories and memories made here.
For the past 10 years, the bookstore owners have been keeping track of books using handwritten logs like these, covered with names in Thai, Vietnamese, Indonesian, English, and Chinese. With no limit to how long they can rent the books, sometimes it's hard to keep track. But for the owners, the real value isn't the books themselves, it's the knowledge inside that's priceless.
And while one chapter closes for the bookstore, its story continues at a major transit hub in Taipei. This is where many Indonesian migrant workers spend their days off. And here, the books come to the readers.
现在南势角的书店虽然要结束，不过这边会持续办下去。那就是不管是我来、我太太来，或者我们有志工，就大家轮流维持这个小空间。那你看这边可能有1000个印尼朋友吧，至少有1-2个爱看书。
In no time, readers are clamoring over their wares.
我喜欢 businessman。
你未来想要当 businessman？
对，我喜欢嘛。
我 like 那个 history book, story book, and comic.
As they turn the page on this chapter of their lives, the owners hope the brilliant times made at their shop will continue in the stories of readers and their lives in Taiwan. James Lin, Kamashri, and Tiffany Wong in New Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for joining us for TaiwanPlus News. Before we go, check out this art exhibition in Paris, which questions the technology that's disrupting our relationship with reality. I'm Joyce. Have a good evening.